Support comes from the Arizona Inn, a four-diamond, family-owned historic resort hotel and restaurant on Elm Street near the U of A. Information is at arizonainn.com.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Ninsel, the executive editor of the Tucson Weekly and Tucson Local Media, and we're here to talk Zona politics. Joining me today, Arizona Daily Star political reporter Joe Ferguson and Tucson Sentinel editor and publisher Dylan Smith. Thanks to both of you guys for joining us.
You bet.
Thanks.
Let's start off with immigration. We've had a wild month with the backlash against the separation of children and their parents at the border under the new Trump administration zero tolerance policy. And then we had Trump blaming it on the Democrats. Then we had Trump saying Congress needed to change the law. He could do nothing about it. Then we had Trump signing an executive order saying he could do something about it, and he was the only one who could solve this problem. And now I'm not quite sure where we are, but Dylan, could you kind of help us understand that?
I don't think we really know. If you follow that path, that sort of tangled web that you just laid out, I think we may be right back where we were about 2 weeks ago.
We have this Flores agreement from the 1990s, and how does that figure in with the new policy of not separating children from their parents? Are we detaining them all together, but they can't do that for more than 20 days?
It's a little unclear how that settlement will affect how things are playing out currently. Unaccompanied minors are not supposed to be held in detention for more than 20 days. They're supposed to be then, at the very least, placed with a nonprofit and held in a much better accommodations. Not to be in a chain link cage somewhere with just a foil blanket and nothing to do all day. But how that works out if they're instead with their families in detention is a little bit unclear at this point, and I'm sure we're going to see more and more litigation about what's going on this summer.
And Joe, we did not manage to get anything through Congress in the last couple of weeks that would possibly resolve any of this.
No, and it's unclear whether we're really going to see anything else now that everybody's on the campaign trail. Congress has got a lot of energy going forward to kind of use this as a ball to throw back and forth. Both Democrats and Republicans have real issues that they can complain about if the system's still broken.
And this bill that died this week was...
Got smashed, crushed, obliterated.
Yes, it did. It really did. And that was supposedly the moderate bill that leadership was trying to get through to avoid a discharge petition for a bill that maybe would have had Democratic support. And
lost 3-1.
It lost 3-1, and that's an even bigger loss than the bill last week, which was being pushed by Martha McSally, which she boasted that it nearly passed.
The one that lost by 22 votes or something, and she was bragging about that?
Yes. Yeah.
And this one that she voted for, was she the only member of the Arizona congressional delegation to vote for this? So all the other Democrats and Republicans said no for the one that was this week.
And so anything on the horizon in Congress, Dylan?
Nothing that will have any substance. I think I agree with Joe that this is going to be a political football being smacked around for the rest of this year.
Because they had said, well, maybe we'll do a narrow bill to deal with the Flores agreement. But that sounds like that's even off the table at this point.
We'll have to see if there's, a sort of a continued political fervor over this issue, something that is very narrow, focused on that. We're not going to see the kind of bill that's been out there that, does something about the border wall and something about the Dreamers and this and that, and, the entire package deal.
The 4 pillars that the president wants with the changes to the immigration system as well.
They might pass a brick or two, but generally speaking, they're not building any kind of substantive policy this way. It's a lot better to possibly fundraise off.
Yeah.
And at one point, they were talking about something in the Senate that would deal with it as well, Joe. But that sounds like that's not going anywhere either.
There isn't anything coming out of the Senate lately. It seems like it's going to be a quiet issue for the next few months as they focus on other things, probably the Supreme Court.
And their re-election campaigns.
Yeah.
First Lady Melania Trump in Tucson today, Dylan, but there was some talk she might go to the local detention center. She visited a different detention center that happens to be on Davis-Monthan Air Force Base.
Yeah, she flew from D.C. to Arizona this morning and came to Tucson first and did not leave the friendly and secure confines of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. There's a big CBP Border Patrol headquarters there, and she had her motorcade cruise across the Air Force Base and go visit there, and especially talk with some folks from Border Patrol about these issues. It really just a political dog and pony show and a little bit of a photo op. There is a small detention center there for basically temporary holding cells where they keep a few people as they figure out where exactly they should go. So that's maybe 10 or a dozen people are held there on a daily basis. And then she left pretty quickly after about 90 minutes, went to Phoenix, and then instead of visiting a Southwest Key shelter here in Tucson, she visited one run by that nonprofit up in the Phoenix area.
And do we know much about the Southwest Key facility here in Tucson, Joe?
We know a little bit about it. We know that it's been around for a while. It made news 2 years ago when it was opening up and children were first being put into it. And there's been attempts to kind of tour it. I know that just recently Paul Durham from City Council has essentially said, I want to come in and inspect it. It has been denied. He's still trying to push that through. But generally speaking, we know just a little bit what's come out in bits and pieces through interviews from former employees and leaked tapes and things of that nature in terms of what you see there.
And there was a former employee who was on Amy Goodman's show talking about the conditions there, and he said he quit because of them. And
they
how
seem to have a lot
was,
of former employees, a number of whom are not very complimentary about the conditions that they saw while they were working there. And I think there was a few years back when it was first opening up, I think Councilman Steve Kozaczek got to tour before they really essentially locked the place down as far as letting anybody have any eyes on what's going on in there. It's a facility that is designed to hold about 300 kids, and I think it's generally been reported that it operates just a little bit under that capacity on a daily basis.
And it used to be a college off-campus dormitory of sorts, and before that it was the Hilton Hotel, and so back in the days when the Hollywood folks passed through Tucson, they used to stay there. So maybe the kids are enjoying the same kind of surroundings as Michael Landon did once upon a time.
If they are, they haven't fixed the place up any since then.
Yeah, that's it. It was getting run down. Dylan, you picked up a piece this week for the Sentinel about MS-13. It was a ProPublica piece talking about what the president gets wrong about MS-13. And can you talk a little bit about what that piece was all about?
We've published a couple of stories picked up from some of our nonprofit partners around the country lately about MS-13, sort of laying out the facts about what this is instead of just the rhetoric that we especially hear coming from Trump and the White House an awful lot. MS-13 is not what is known by law enforcement as a transnational criminal organization. It's not a drug cartel that's smuggling. It's certainly a violent street gang, but it's mostly a U.S. street gang. It was founded in Los Angeles and has really grown up amongst folks connected with Central America, but who are U.S. residents, mostly long-term U.S. residents. They do have now some connection going back to street gangs in Central America, El Salvador especially, but it's not, you don't see people who are MS-13 drug smuggler cartel members, because there really aren't any, trying to sneak across the border disguised as children, which is kind of the story that we're hearing from Trump. That's not happening. That's not how things work.
We've heard a lot about how the gang started here and then kind of exported itself to Central America and is causing all kinds of trouble down there.
They're certainly not the only gang down there. I mean, too many of those countries are completely riven by street gangs because their governments have essentially fallen apart.
And Joe, all this immigration stuff going to be a key issue in our Senate and congressional races this year, you expect?
We'll see. I mean, right now we're still waiting for more debates. Republicans haven't had a public debate in CD2 yet, so we haven't seen a lot of them campaigning on what their issues are. I expect that the wall will still be kind of a dividing rod where Democrats are going to talk about how the other side wants to build it, and Republicans are going to keep talking about how they need to build it. And we're going to see some of that, but it's not something that, when I'm talking to people out there who are supporters, who are interested in politics, it's not the number one issue. It's just not something that kind of bubbles up right now. Certainly, I expect going forward that we're going to see a little bit of that, but it's coming from Kelly Ward, it's coming from Joe Arpaio, people who aren't from Southern Arizona.
And you mentioned Kelly Ward and Joe Arpaio. They are running against Martha McSally in this U.S. Senate race on the Republican side. On the other side, it's Kirsten Sinema versus Deidre Abowd, and I think maybe a couple other people on the ballot who don't have seemingly much of a campaign. But the polling seems to show it's shaping up as McSally versus Sinema at this point. And what's your sense of what's going on in the Republican primary right now, Joe?
I think that, it's both Kelly Ward and Joe Arpaio are household names, and people know them and have either a like for them or not. Ward especially seems to be a polarizing figure in terms of Republicans, whereas McSally is still trying to get out there and trying to get her name recognition. She's great down here, but she still has to make a name for herself in Maricopa County and some of the other areas of Northern County where polls are showing that she's running neck and neck with Kelly Ward.
Your
Kelly Ward,
well?
Despite having a lower profile as far as her government experience, having been in the state legislature instead of in Congress, because of her, especially her run against McCain in that Senate primary, really built a name for herself, especially among a certain segment of the Republican Party. And we are talking about a Republican primary here. Those are the people you have to appeal to, and for a lot of them, she does. So yeah, McSally does have an uphill battle as far as trying to get statewide name recognition. Certainly down here, we all know her very well. But how many people do in Maricopa County, which is what really counts if you want to win a statewide election.
And it seems like McSally has moved considerably to the right as part of this campaign.
Right out of the gate, from the very first when she announced her Senate campaign.
She launched right into it.
Yeah, she went full on trying to cozy up with Trump and be as close to him as she could possibly be, and that came after a couple of years of her trying to basically pretend that Donald Trump doesn't exist. She would not address Trump's policies. She would not, really. I don't think she's ever said whether she voted for him or not. She certainly did not endorse him. Refused to. Didn't want to talk about him throughout that entire presidential campaign.
We've all tried to talk to her about Trump when he was running for office, after he was elected. There were certainly a number of times where we wanted to get comments from her, especially as our Southern Arizona representative, as a woman, and she largely deflected most of those things. She was too busy to run. There are a few times where she did criticize Trump, but it was very mild by comparison to even her Republican colleagues like John McCain.
Right. When the Access Hollywood tape came out, she expressed some concern about the language that was on that. And Joe, she also, I think we've complained a lot that we didn't know where she stood on a lot of positions as we've covered her over the years. Yeah. She seems to be letting us know where she stands now.
She does. I think that there are some shifts in where she was from when she was running in 2014 to now, but she is certainly coming out with a stronger, more Republican themed, I guess, right-wing, part of the party in her appeal when she goes out to talk to people.
Is she letting us know where she stands now, or is she letting us know where she stands now? Is this down to the political expediency of this race? She wants to run for Senate, and she has to position herself in this primary filled with a lot of voters who are Trump supporters.
And we're seeing.
Does she really mean all this, or is this a way to frame her?
I mean, I think that her stance on the president would be very difficult to pivot away from at this point. So in that way, I mean, she's come so far to be a Trump candidate that I really can't imagine herself distancing her from the president.
Is that a bad thing come November if she gets through the primary? Is that a bad thing in the general election?
Ask me again after the FBI report comes out.
Yeah, that's kind of the big question is can she pivot after the primary? Because some polls are showing her really trailing Kirsten Sinema, who's the likely Democratic nominee. She's running against a Muslim attorney, Deidre Abowd, and Sinema seems to be running away with it from all appearances at this point in terms of fundraising and polling and whatnot.
Fundraising especially. Aboud's been really good on the campaign trail, a really effective communicator, and is a
Dedicated campaigner.
very dedicated, has a lot of people who are, very, very supportive of her, but maybe not a wide enough group of people.
And we've also seen the Democrats try to discuss censoring cinema just a couple weeks ago over in Pima County. So she's got some enemies inside the Democratic Party, and that's going to be a problem down the road.
Because we talk about McSally kind of moving to the right, it seems like Kirsten Sinema has also moved to the right over the course of her political career, Joe. She started out very much on the left as a Green Party or a socialist or wherever she was, and now she finds herself voting alongside the Trump administration probably more than any other Democrat in Arizona.
I covered Kirsten Sinema when I was up at the legislature in 2006, and it's very different than the woman she is today.
Yeah, she has moved from being a lefty, a socialist, to a blue dog conservative Democrat.
But that seems to have worked for her politically up until this point. I mean,
Yeah.
she certainly is now in the lead in these polls for Senate.
Well, we'll see. I mean, we looked at how well New York went with seeing, incumbents pulled out, replaced by progressives. So it's going to be interesting to see whether blue dog Democrats, in terms of Sinema, as well as Kirkpatrick, are really going to bring out those progressive voters when it comes time in November.
And I wanted to bring that up because we've got CD2 here where McSally's departing, and you mentioned Ann Kirkpatrick, who's considered the front runner, I think, in that campaign at this point. But she also, I think, maybe needs to be worried a little bit after what we saw in New York with a very left-wing candidate unseating a 10-term congressman who was very high-ranking.
The number 4 member of Congress on the Democratic side.
So is that something Kirkpatrick needs to be concerned about here in southern Arizona as she runs this campaign?
Probably
she does
not.
have some pretty lefty.
But there are
folks in
so
this
race.
many
lefties running.
she's-
Everybody else in
Everybody
that
else to
primary
the left is to the left of Kirkpatrick.
says they are progressive, and that is, there are 7 people in that race. When you start dividing up the votes that much, I think somebody who has that sort of name recognition, that kind of fundraising, and that ability to run a
Institutional backing,
campaign.
too.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
the DCCC is supposed to be putting out ads for her in the coming weeks, we hear.
And that
we-
makes a big difference.
We saw her release another ad today. She's, I think, the only one up on TV at this point in that race, trying to make sure that voters know who she is, because, of course, she used to represent Congressional District 1. She ran for Senate, but now she's going to run here in Congressional District 2, so she's gone from Flagstaff to Phoenix to Tucson, evidently. And that was a big lawsuit that was going on with Matt Hines, or he, I think, funded it and had some of his supporters file this lawsuit against her in terms of her residency. She prevailed, but there was some interesting testimony about how much time she actually does spend in southern Arizona and her living arrangements here. She's evidently living with her son-in-law, and her husband's living in Phoenix still. And does this hurt her? As she's got concerns about being a reputation as a carpetbagger. Dylan, does this lawsuit hurt her?
A little bit, perhaps. I think if you are a Kirkpatrick supporter, I don't think it wavers your commitment to voting for her at all. I think for some voters, it might sway them against her. I think it also, in some ways, was not great for Matt Hines, who funded this lawsuit and made it happen. It was a little bit of a snarky move and clearly an attempt to discredit her. And that sort of tactic, with some voters, doesn't play very well. Other voters, want somebody who's willing to get in there and tussle. So,
I don't know. I tend to disagree. It seems that every time I've covered an election, there's always this kind of group of people who say, I've been in Tucson for 50 years. No, I've been in here for 60 years. My parents have been here for 3 generations. Kind of this argument that, we have to elect our own, we have to bring them up. And there seems to be some very anger about this. I agree that Matt, did dirty himself by going into this, but I think that if Matt hadn't brought the lawsuit, I think another Democrat would have. So there was a lot of people talking about this on the ground in the days right before she turned in her signatures.
but with so many people who were not 14th generation Tucsonans living here. Does it really matter?
It just seems to be a topic on the campaign trail. I'm not arguing about the math of, how many of them are going to rise to the top here, but it seems to be something that a lot of people going to the same events you and I both go to are angry about.
I don't think we're, to get back to your initial question, I don't think we're really seeing the sort of situation where we could have the progressive insurgent, take out the sort of conservative establishment front runner in the Democratic primary here. Just there are so many of them, and I think they will, kind of split up that sort of vote.
So you're still looking at Kirkpatrick as the front runner. Joe still the front runner in your
I think the math is
estimation?
the same as that it's 6 against 1. It's hard. It's going to split the vote. So I don't expect that Kirkpatrick's going to get half the vote, though, when it comes time for this primary.
And there's also how much money do the other candidates have to even get a message out saying that Kirkpatrick's a carpetbagger or too moderate or a blue dog or what have you.
You could win this primary with 30% of the vote.
Right.
Let's switch over to local. Pima County Board of Supervisors decided to push forward with a road bond. A final vote still awaits, but they want to sell $400 million plus $430 million in road bonds. Joe, how did we get here where road bonds are now the last best hope, I think, in the view of a lot of Pima County elected officials?
I think that we got here because we've had this argument for a while about bonds, and there was a super bond 3 years ago that voters rejected wildly that had some road money in it. There was a property tax that was passed last year that put a 25 cents in per
The property taxes.
Yeah.
It was
so
25 cents per 100, was that it?
Yeah, it was a small amount.
Whatever that means.
It didn't generate a lot of it. It would bring in so much money, but roads would get so much worse through it. There was the discussion about the sales tax. That had a poison pill that neither Allie nor Steve Christie wanted to swallow. And so now the question is that, well, we can do it this way. The argument is from Huckleberry's office is that it's not going to raise rates at all, important distinction, and that the voters will have the final say in this. We'll see what voters want to do about it, but I mean, it seems like everybody wants to complain about roads. Now the question is, are they willing to pay for it? Tucson voters have done it twice already, so they're the largest constituent in terms of this voting bloc when it comes time to November. And so with that, Tucsonans are going to decide this.
And this money is going to be spread across all jurisdictions.
It's based by population, so everybody gets a little bit, but Pima County will get approximately 40%.
And Dylan, are county officials right? Is this the last opportunity to get something done?
Maybe not last, but we're really starting to run out of options. And when you try and drive any significant distance, anywhere, especially where the county is maintaining the roads, but pretty much any jurisdiction in this county, it's kind of tough on your vehicle. We need to do something. You see how the roads have over the past couple of years, in a lot of places inside the city of Tucson, been improved a great deal because of that road bond that was passed. And what do we do if this does not pass? I don't think anyone has a good answer for that.
And because you could go back to the legislature and ask them for authority again, but that went nowhere this session or any other recent ones. And but what about you mentioned the bonds came out, the voters rejected bonds in 2015. What makes this different?
Well, there's not a lot different in terms of what we're talking about here. It's just whether we're going to see organized resistance like we did 3 years ago.
And this is not such an overarching package deal as that sort of super bond thing was. Even though those were separate questions, and there was the individual question about road bonds and then this bond and that bond, the kind of thing. This will be the people campaigning both for and against this will be able to focus on the question of how we should fix the roads.
And the bonds came as close as anything did in that election. It was
they
just
did
a few
the best.
percentage points, and you don't have all the other things where people are going to complain about
Velodrome and et cetera.
So there's not all that stuff. We've got about a minute left. Joe, trouble for the city going for these park bonds at the same time, $200 million in park bonds. Does that present an issue?
I think the park bonds are going to be decided by the road bonds. If people vote for the road bonds, they're going to be more likely to vote for the park bonds. But if there's a poison pill or people that are dead set against the road bonds, I think it's going to hurt the city's chances when it comes to parks, where it's just not big of a necessity as roads.
does that possibly work the other way, sort of as it did 3 years ago, where if people are, campaigning against putting money into parks, will that sort of reflect onto the road bond question as well?
The city's already voted twice for road bonds, so you could see that, but I'd be surprised.
We will see. I want to thank my guests, Dylan Smith from the Tucson Sentinel, Joe Ferguson from the Arizona Daily Star, for joining us today. That is our show. I'd also like to thank our media partners at Tucson Weekly, Inside Tucson Business, Tucson Local Media, Creative Tucson, and Community Radio, KXCI 91.3 FM, where you can hear a radio version of Zona Politics at 5 p.m. on Sunday afternoons. I'm Jim Ninsel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Zona Politics is made possible with the generous support of the Loft Cinema, Tucson's independent movie theater. The Loft features independent, foreign, and documentary films, cult classics, discussions with filmmakers, and much more, including the Loft Film Fest in November. The Loft is located at 3233 East Speedway Boulevard. Showtimes can be found at loftcinema.org. Support for Zona Politics is provided by Hotel Congress in historic downtown Tucson. More information at hotelcongress.com and 622-8848. The Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce serves the business community in the bilingual, bicultural region of the Arizona-Sonora border and is a proud media partner with Zona Politics. Learn more at TucsonHispanicChamber.org.
All of these young people from the community come together, actually get up and do something.
We can do anything!
I think we've attracted a lot of people that are super passionate.
We're here at the No Ban, No Wall protest.
If you come out of college, you have this experience, you know how things run, you have a huge leg up.
People who have ideas and who are dreamers, you know what I mean, who really want to get themselves out there. I think that they should come here.
Zona Politics is hosted by Tucson Weekly senior writer Jim Ninsel. The program is produced by Jennifer Powers Murphy and Danny Vinnick and edited by Jim Rundle. Special thanks to KXCI, Tucson Weekly, Brink Creative Digital, and all supporters who provide crucial funding for the program. Learn more about Zona Politics at zonapolitics.com and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter.